Let's talk about Golden Sun, the sequel to Red Rising. I'm really powering through this trilogy. This one, okay, if I was to summarise my thoughts on it, it would be that Brittany Broski meme, the one where she's like, it would be that. Because the first half of this book, didn't care for it. I thought, wow, this is boring. I'm really going off this series. How am I supposed to stay interested? Then the second half, I thought, you know what? I've been too judgmental, Pierce Brown. You've won me back, okay? The second half, if it had been that way all the way through, would have loved this. It's I think overall, it's just okay. Like I don't think this series is going to be one that changes my life, which is what I said when I finished the first book, and so I'm not too surprised. But I do think that this has quite a dramatic ending, which is why I was very quick to jump into the third one. We're about 100 pages into the third one. So I guess we'll see. I think for me, the biggest problem with Golden Sun is that it felt a bit contrived in the way that it tried to undo things that we had already established in the first book. Because I think the problem is, it was a classic case of writing your main character into a corner where Darrow's power levels at the end of the first book were at an all-time high. And so in this second book, in order to have something for him to overcome, he suddenly had to have all of these handicaps that didn't make any sense with what we already knew about his character. Like, in this book, Darrow is stupid. He has poor diplomatic skills and he makes so many mistakes, which, I mean, by the end of the book, they really catch up to him. But it was frustrating when it feels like he should know better than that. We've seen him achieve so much in such a short space of time. So for him to suddenly have all these hang-ups, it just didn't feel like a very realistic character study. It felt more like, oh, you're creating these problems for him so that you can stretch out his arc over 3 books. You know what I mean? I do think there's an interesting lesson here in how to properly pace a trilogy and how to also give us a sequel that takes what was great about the first book and almost sort of reboots it. Because that's what I love so much about Catching Fire. Catching Fire for me is like a perfect sequel because it takes everything you love about the Hunger Games and amplifies it to this bigger scale. And that's also why the Maze Runner trilogy, I think, is a terrible book series because you can tell that the moment those boys left the maze, James Dashner didn't know what he was doing with them, and so he completely makes it up on the fly. They're suddenly, walking across the desert because there's some sun disease that's making people go crazy. It's like, what happened here? This book really turns the series into space Game of Thrones in the sense that Darrow, who all of a sudden has these character flaws that were never fully realised in the first book, but whatever, it's fine. He needs something to overcome. He knows that he is falling out of grace in the House of Augustus, and so he creates a civil war so that he can sort of like show his own in this chaotic field. And I guess it makes sense, but it got to a point where I twigged it. I was like, wait, he is just Jon Snow. Like, not as well written, of course. I mean, who can be on George R. R. Martin's level? But his arc is just Jon Snow. Just like Jon Snow, he is born into a low social status that he can't really do much about. But then over time, he is able to like rise to the occasion, and then he has this whole philosophy around, bringing wildlings into Westeros, or in this series, allowing lesser colour factions to have more human rights, which of course makes him wildly unpopular, leading to a huge betrayal near the end of his story, which, we'll get to. I might just be saying this because Severo is my favourite character, but I think this series would be a lot more successful if Severo was the main character instead of Darrow. Because we find out in this book that Severo is mixed race, mixed species. He's the product of a red and a gold. And that just makes so much more sense from an activist point of view. Like, it makes him a more relatable character, especially if we're supposed to compare this to the real world inequalities of our society. Like Darrow, it feels weird that the whole time he's trying to create this class equality between the different coloured factions, but he is someone who had to completely like reverse engineer his entire person in order to fit in with another group, and yet we're supposed to think that they should all be equal. It's also really frustrating to me, at least, how fast and loose Darrow is with revealing his status as a red to people in his circle. And he'll be like, oh yeah, they're my friends, they need to know. Like, oh, I can't keep lying to Mustang, I need to tell her. But it's also like, you know this secret is your undoing. Why are you going to tell Ragnar, Severo, Mustang? You don't do anything about the Jackal, even though he is chasing after the terrorists who also have the knowledge about your status. So when the book ends and all of this blows up in his face, it's kind of like, yeah, that's what you deserve. You've been playing a terrible game, and I don't know why, because in the first book you were actually really good at strategy, and that was what made you an entertaining character to root for, because you actually knew what you were doing. In this one, you're suddenly inept, and I don't know why. Well, I mean, I do know why. It's so that you could have enough material for these 3 books, but maybe just pace it better, you know, the character development. It was so bizarre. But I will say the ending was very good. The ending was Red Rising does Red Wedding. It was dramatic. There were so many character deaths, which I always appreciate, because some writers will coddle their characters until the end and won't let you lose anyone. I like it when a writer gets a bloodlust and it's just like stab, stab, stab. You're dead, you're dead, you're dead. Yes, good. Real consequences. We love to see it. But it was basically The Empire Strikes Back. It was like, okay, the sequel ends with the villain's triumph, and the 3rd book will be us seeing how the heroes managed to come back from this. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Darrow ended up frozen in carbonite and they have to go to some outer rim drug lord to free him. I mean, that would probably be better than what will actually happen. I think that's what's made this series difficult as well for me to enjoy, because even though I did really like the second half, creatively this world is lacking, and I've read and experienced enough sci-fi that I know that it shouldn't be, you know? Like, there's so many missed opportunities in this world. It's ironic that all the factions are based in colours, and yet the overall story is just very beige. Like, the world building as well. In this book, the first book just stays on Mars. This book, we travel briefly to the moon and to Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. But when we're on both of these other locations, there's no care. Like, Pierce Brown doesn't take a moment to unpack the culture and like the local differences between these different planets and moons. Like, get into it. What is the language? What is the religion? Tell me. Like, I don't know, the world building, it's such a character plot driven book that I feel like the world building gets left to the wayside, and that's sad to see. And yes, if you're wondering if the misogyny in this one continued from Red Rising, it absolutely does. I'm sorry, Mustang is not a strong female character. There's this weird sort of collection of lovers where Darrow is still mourning the loss of Io, but he's also going after Mustang, but then he also has Victra. It's like he's collecting all of these different women. It's weird. And there's too many gay jokes as well. Can we like get rid of the gay jokes? So yeah, that was Golden Sun. Is it worth the hype? No. Will I be talking about it in years to come? No. Am I still going to read Morning Star and enjoy it somewhat? Yeah, sure. And I'll tell you about it, of course.